My name is Marcos, and I spend more nights talking to weather equipment than to people. I work as a maintenance and monitoring technician at a remote station, perched atop a mountain the locals call Devil's Spine. It's a fitting name. The place is isolated, swept by howling winds, and the nearest town is almost a 2-hour drive down a treacherous road. I'm the only one here during my week-long shift. Then I rotate with another guy, Carlos. It's solitary work, but I like the peace, the silence, except on full moon nights. I'm not a superstitious guy. I don't believe in werewolves or that the full moon drives people crazy, but there's something undeniable about the full moon's light up here. With no light pollution, the brightness is almost blinding, silvering the rocky landscape and twisted pines in a spectral way. Visibility is incredible, but the shadows become deeper, darker, as if the light itself is pushing the darkness into the corners. It's on these nights, and only these nights, that things get strange. The first time was subtle. I was doing my usual nightly rounds, checking the external sensors. The moon was huge in the sky, a cold pearl. I heard a sound from the tree line just below the station. It sounded like a deer moving through the brush, breaking branches. Normal. We have plenty of wildlife up here. But then the sound changed. It became a heavy, uneven dragging, as if something was pulling itself along the ground, not walking. And it was accompanied by a low, wet, snapping sound. I shone my powerful flashlight in that direction. Nothing. The sound stopped instantly. I felt a chill, but chalked it up to the mountain's strange echoes, and my own imagination amplified by loneliness and the bizarre moonlight. The following month, full moon again. Same time, around 2 a.m. This time, the sound was closer. It was a dry rattling, like bones clacking together, coming from behind a large rock outcrop not far from the station entrance. And mixed with it, a low whistling sound, like wind through a crack. But there was no wind at that moment. It was almost dead silent, except for that rattling and whistling. I yelled out, "Who's there?" The sound stopped abruptly. I again felt the sensation of being watched, a pressure in the air. I cautiously circled the rock, flashlight ready. Nothing, not even footprints in the damp night soil, as if whatever made the noise had simply evaporated. I started dreading. Full moon nights. Carlos, my colleague, never mentioned anything similar. I asked him casually if he'd ever heard anything strange during full moons. He laughed. "Just the coyotes getting rowdier, maybe. Or the wind playing tricks. You're spending too much time alone up here, Marcos." Maybe he was right, but the fear was real. The third full moon was worse. I was inside the station, monitoring data on the computer. Moonlight flooded the small room through the panoramic window. It was almost 3 a.m. I heard scratching on the outside wall. Not animal scratching, like a bear or a cougar. It was slow, deliberate, almost methodical. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It moved up the wall, past the window, but I saw nothing, just the moonlight shining on the glass, and continued onto the roof. Then, silence. I sat frozen in my chair, listening to my own heart hammering. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, jumping at every creak of the station's structure. I started researching Devil's Spine. Local legends, old stories. Most were standard folklore about lost miners' spirits or wind creatures. But I found one obscure reference on a nearly abandoned local history blog about something the old inhabitants called moon-drawn or pale shadows. The description was vague, creatures that only appeared under the brightest full moon, attracted by the light or perhaps by the mountain itself during that period. They were described as silent, pale, and capable of mimicking sounds to lure or confuse. Most dismissed it as legend to scare children, but to me, it sounded terrifyingly familiar. The next full moon arrived with a late snowstorm, which was a bizarre relief. The snow and clouds blocked the moonlight. That night there was only the howl of the wind and the patter of snow against the windows. No strange sounds, no scratching, no sense of presence. It reinforced my dreadful suspicion. Whatever it was directly linked to the full moon's light. But the reprieve was short. The lunar cycle continued. The following full moon was set to be a supermoon, especially close and bright. I felt a growing dread in the days leading up to my shift. I thought about calling in sick, asking Carlos to switch. But what would I say? That I was afraid of the moon? He'd think I'd finally lost it. I resigned myself to it. I had to face it. I reinforced the door locks, checked the batteries in my most powerful flashlight and the emergency radio. The night of the supermoon arrived. The sky was clear, cloudless. The light was so intense it almost looked like day, but a cold, silver, dead day. The entire mountain seemed bathed in liquid mercury. I was inside the station trying to focus on the monitors, but my ears were strained for any noise. Around 1:30 a.m. it began. A very low sound, almost on the edge of hearing. A soft, repetitive clicking. It came from the window. I went to it, hesitant. I saw nothing on the glass. But the clicking continued. I looked outside at the moonlit landscape. And I saw movement. Near the edge of the small clearing where the station stood, a shadow. No, more than a shadow, a shape. It was tall and extremely thin, almost skeletal. Its color was a pale, sickly white, almost bioluminescent under the moonlight. It moved in an erratic, jerky way, long limbs contorting at unnatural angles. It didn't seem to have a face, just a smooth, pale surface where one should be. And it was moving slowly towards the station. I backed away from the window, panic gripping my throat. The clicking on the window stopped. It was replaced by the sound of wet, ragged breathing right outside the main door. I grabbed the emergency radio, tried to call base, the police, anyone, just static. Same thing with my cell phone. No signal, as if the creature's very presence interfered with transmissions. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly. I had locked it and put the chain on, but seeing it happen, I backed up further, stumbling over a chair. The door groaned under pressure from outside, a sound of splintering wood. The thing was trying to get in. It was there, just on the other side of the door, drawn by the light or by me or by the station. That pale shadow from the legends. I looked around desperately, nowhere to run. The station was small. I grabbed a heavy crowbar kept near the door for emergencies. It was a pathetic defense against that. The pressure on the door stopped. The ragged breathing ceased. Silence, an expectant, even more terrifying silence. I stood there, crowbar raised, muscles tense, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing. Had it gone? Very cautiously, I approached the door's peephole, looked through it. The landscape outside was bathed in the cold supermoon light. I saw no sign of the pale creature anywhere. I took a deep breath, a shaky sigh of relief. Maybe it was over. That's when I heard the soft clicking again. Not at the door, at the panoramic window in the monitoring room, behind me. I turned slowly, icy terror creeping up my spine. And there it was, outside the window. Its smooth, pale face was pressed against the glass, inches from mine. There were no eyes, but I felt it seeing me. Its long, thin limbs clung to the station wall, and one of its skeletal hands, with fingers like dried twigs, was tapping softly on the glass. Click, click, click. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I stood paralyzed, staring at that pale abomination illuminated by the moon. It didn't try to break the glass. It just stayed there, watching, clicking, waiting. What did it want? I don't know how long we stood there, me inside it. Outside, separated only by a pane of glass. It felt like an eternity. Then, as slowly as it arrived, it began to move away. It slid down the wall, its movements still erratic and disjointed, and retreated into the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing, swallowed by the darkness that not even the supermoon could fully penetrate. I stayed awake until sunrise, crowbar still in hand, staring at the empty window. When the first ray of sun hit the mountain, I felt the pressure in the air lessen. The fear receded slightly, replaced by a deep, absolute exhaustion. My shift ended the next day. Carlos arrived, oblivious. I didn't tell him what I saw. Who would believe it? I requested a transfer as soon as I got back to the city, said the isolation was getting to me. I managed to get a job in a noisy, safe suburban office, but I haven't forgotten. Every time the full moon approaches, I feel a pang of anxiety. I look up at the night sky with apprehension, and sometimes, when I'm home alone, in the quiet of the night, I swear I hear it. A soft, rhythmic clicking coming from the window. It might just be my mind. But I have the terrible feeling that the pale thing the moon attracts is no longer confined to the mountain. Maybe it remembers me. Maybe, next full moon, it will come tapping at my window again, no matter where I am. Helena knew that road like the back of her hand, or so she thought. As a home care nurse in a predominantly rural region, the winding, poorly lit back roads were her nightly office. Miles of cracked asphalt snaking between cornfields, pastures, and patches of dense forest. She was used to the isolation, the quiet broken only by the sound of her reliable old car's engine or the distant howl of a coyote. But nothing prepared her for what she began to see on full moon nights, specifically on the long, desolate stretch connecting the Miller farm to the small village where she lived. It was a late summer night, and the full moon hung in the sky like a giant silver eye, bathing the landscape in a pale, ethereal light that made everything strangely sharp and, simultaneously, unreal. Helena was driving home around midnight after a long shift caring for Mr. Miller, bedridden and with only a few weeks left. The road was deserted as always at that hour. It was as she passed a large field of recently harvested hay, the round bales scattered like silent sentinels under the moon, that she saw the first figure. Standing at the edge of the field, about 50 yards from the road, it looked like a person, a man perhaps, wearing dark clothes. He was completely motionless, his back to the road, gazing towards the distant horizon, where the moon shone brightly. Helena instinctively slowed down a little. Strange to see someone standing there, alone, in the middle of the night. But maybe it was a farmer checking on something, or someone whose car had stopped further ahead. She continued on, pushing the image from her mind. A few miles later, another field, this time tall, dry corn, the leaves rustling in the night breeze. And there they were, not one, but 3 figures, standing in the same rigid posture, backs to the road, facing the moon. They were closer this time, maybe 30 yards away. The moonlight was so clear, Helena could make out their silhouettes perfectly, but she couldn't discern details of their faces or clothing. They looked like dark statues in a silver sea of corn. A sense of unease began to settle in. This didn't feel normal. She kept driving, her eyes now nervously scanning the fields on both sides of the road, and she began seeing them more frequently. Groups of 2 or 3, solitary individuals, always motionless, always with their backs to the road, always facing the direction of the moon, or perhaps something on the horizon only they could see under that specific light. They were in open fields, at the edge of woods, near abandoned barns. They seemed to sprout from the moonlit landscape. Helena tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a local cult performing some kind of lunar ritual, or teenagers playing a prank. But their stillness was what disturbed her most. It was absolute, not the slightest movement, not even a shift in posture. And the silence. She heard nothing from them, not even when she passed relatively close. The road took a sharp turn, entering a stretch flanked by dark forest on both sides. Helena felt a brief relief at no longer having the open fields in view. But the relief was short-lived. As she came out of the turn, her headlights illuminated something on the shoulder of the road. Very close to the edge, it was a woman, standing there, less than 15 feet from the car. She too had her back turned, wearing a long, light-colored dress that fluttered slightly, although Helena felt no breeze there. Her dark hair was loose, cascading down her back. She stared fixedly into the forest on the other side of the road. Helena instinctively slammed on the brakes, her heart leaping into her throat. The car stopped, just yards from her. The headlights bathed the woman in light, but she didn't move, didn't react. "Hey, are you okay?" Helena shouted through the closed window, her voice trembling. No response. The woman remained as still as a marble column under the moon. Helena's fear began morphing into panic. There was something terribly wrong with this scene. The unnatural stillness, the fixed gaze into the dark forest. Slowly, heart in her mouth, Helena started to accelerate again to drive around the figure. As she passed beside her, she couldn't resist. She glanced over. It was a mistake. The woman was turning her head, slowly, very slowly. And the face that turned towards Helena wasn't human, or at least not entirely. The skin was smooth and pale as wax under the headlights and moonlight. The eyes were too large, completely black, with no iris or sclera like pools of liquid darkness, and the mouth was stretched wide in a fixed, broad smile, filled with teeth that seemed slightly too pointed. The smile conveyed no joy, no recognizable emotion. It was an empty, predatory rictus. Helena screamed and floored the accelerator. The car shot down the road. She didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. She kept her eyes fixed on the strip of asphalt fleeing before her, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She drove for several miles, the panic slowly subsiding, giving way to an uncontrollable tremor. She tried to convince herself she had imagined it, that stress and the moonlight had created a hallucination. But the image of that face, those black eyes and that smile, was burned into her mind. When she finally calmed down enough to dare a glance in the rearview mirror, she saw nothing but the empty road stretching behind her under the moonlight. But the sense of dread didn't leave her. She arrived home, locked all the doors and windows, turned on all the lights. She couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, trembling, waiting for dawn. When the first rays of sun painted the sky, she felt a wave of relief so intense she almost cried. The daylight seemed to banish the unreality of the night. In the following days, Helena tried to find explanations. Researched stress-induced hallucinations, local legends related to the full moon in that region, found nothing that explained the motionless figures in the fields or the woman's face on the road. She spoke discreetly with other locals, asking about strange things seen on the road at night. No one reported anything similar. It was as if that phenomenon, those figures, only existed for her, and only under the specific light of the full moon. She continued working, caring for Mr. Miller until his passing a few weeks later. But she began avoiding driving on that specific road during full moon nights. She asked to switch shifts, made excuses, or took a huge detour via another route, even if it added over an hour to her trip. The fear was too great. Months passed. Life went on. Helena almost managed to convince herself it had all been a bizarre episode caused by exhaustion. Until the next full moon. She was home, safe, but she couldn't help but glance out her bedroom window towards the distant fields visible from her. House bathed in the same silver, ghostly light, and there they were. Even from a distance she could see them. Small, dark, motionless dots in the moonlit fields. Solitary figures, groups of 2 or 3, standing still, watching the moon. Or waiting. She quickly closed the curtains, her heart pounding. They weren't just on that road. They were everywhere, visible only under the full moon. What were they? Were they real people caught in some kind of trance? or something else? Entirely something that wore human shape and was awakened by the moon. Helena never got answers. She just learned to live with the fear and uncertainty. On full moon nights, she closes the curtains, avoids looking outside, and tries to ignore the subtle but persistent feeling that out there, in the silent fields, motionless figures stand under the silver light, united in an unknown and terrifying purpose, waiting for something only the moon and they know, and she prays they never find out she saw them. My name is Daniel. I'm a writer, or at least I try to be. Last year, after a particularly brutal writer's block and an equally painful breakup, I decided I needed a drastic change of scenery. I rented a small, isolated stone cottage on the rocky coast, a place swept by wind and salt, where the loudest sound was the crashing of waves against the rocks below. It was the kind of isolation I thought I needed to find my voice again, or maybe just to lick my wounds in peace. The cottage was old, drafty, and had a murky past the realtor conveniently forgot to detail, but it had a spectacular view of the ocean, especially on full moon nights. Ah, the full moon. I never paid much attention to it before. It was just a pretty light in the sky. But on that remote coast, with no other lights for miles, the full moon transformed the sea. It became a vast, undulating expanse of liquid silver, the waves shimmering with an almost supernatural intensity. It was beautiful, yes, but also unsettling. There was a different energy in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to emanate from the illuminated ocean itself. I first noticed it during the second full moon since I'd moved in. I was on the small back porch overlooking the rocks and the sea trying to write. The night was incredibly clear, the moon high and round. That's when I heard it, a faint sound almost lost in the constant roar of the waves. It sounded like singing. Not human music, not like anything I'd ever heard. It was a strange, dissonant, yet hypnotic melody, with multiple voices that seemed to rise and fall in unconventional scales. It came from the sea. I thought I was imagining it, that it was the wind or the waves creating a strange acoustic pattern. But the sound persisted, faint but constant, for almost an hour before gradually fading away. I felt a chill, a sense of strangeness I couldn't shake off. The following month, full moon again. I was ready, waiting. Around the same time as the moon reached its zenith, the singing began. This time, it seemed a little clearer, closer. The voices were more distinct, though they still didn't sound human. There was a melancholy tone to them, but also something hollow, like the sound of empty shells being dragged by the tide. I stood on the porch, listening, trying to discern words or structure, but it was just that alien, repetitive melody, rising and falling, coming from the silver depths out there. It lasted about the same time, maybe an hour and a half, and then ceased. I started researching the area. Coastal legends, maritime folklore, found the usual stories of ghost ships and mermaids, but I found some more obscure references to tide singers or full moon laments, legends about strange sounds heard from the sea only on the brightest full moon nights, associated with unexplained shipwrecks and the occasional disappearance of people living too close to the shore. The accounts were old, fragmented, dismissed as fishermen's superstition, but the pattern, full moon, sounds from the sea, was undeniable. The third full moon brought a new dimension to the phenomenon. The singing started as before, coming from the illuminated sea, but this time, after about half an hour, I noticed something else. Lights, not boat lights. These were pale orbs of light, greenish and bluish, that seemed to emerge from the water, a few hundred yards offshore. They were small, maybe the size of a football, and pulsed gently in time with the cadence of the alien singing. They moved slowly, just below the surface, sometimes breaking the waterline briefly before submerging. Again, they seemed to be responding to the music, or perhaps they were the source of the music. I watched, fascinated and terrified from my dark porch. The lights danced and pulsed for nearly an hour, while the singing filled the air. Then, just like the singing, the lights slowly sank into the depths and vanished, leaving only the silver sea and the sound of the waves. That changed everything. It wasn't just sound. There was something physical, something real out there beneath the surface. Fear began to consume me. I was alone in this isolated cottage on the edge of an ocean that apparently hid things that sang and glowed under the full moon. I thought about leaving, about breaking the lease and returning to the anonymous safety of the city. But there was another part of me, the writer's part, the part fascinated by the inexplicable, that was intrigued. I wanted to know what it was. I needed to know. On the next full moon, I decided to get closer. Instead of staying on the porch, I climbed down the steep, treacherous path leading to the wet, black rocks at the base of the cliff where the cottage perched. The tide was low, exposing a small strip of sand and seaweed-covered rocks. The moon was almost directly overhead, its blinding light reflecting in the tide pools. I found a sheltered spot between two large rocks where I could watch the sea without being easily seen from the water. I waited. The singing began. Down here near the water it was much louder, clearer. It enveloped me. The voices seemed to vibrate in my chest. It wasn't an unpleasant sound exactly, but it was profoundly wrong, unnatural, like an attempt to mimic beauty made by something that didn't understand the concept. And then the lights appeared, closer than ever, emerging from the waves breaking just yards away from me. There were dozens of them now, pulsing softly with their cold light. And I could see more clearly what happened when they broke the surface. The light didn't come from a solid object, but from within gelatinous, almost transparent shapes that undulated gently. They had no definite form like giant, luminous amoebas, but the worst was yet to come. As I watched the pulsing lights and listened to the hypnotic singing, I began to see movement on the wet rocks closer to the waterline. Figures, emerging from the waves, dragging themselves out of the silver foam. They weren't the lights. They were different. Humanoid in general shape, but terribly distorted. They had pale, almost grey and translucent skin that shimmered slightly under the moon. Their limbs were too long, the joints seeming dislocated. They moved with an aquatic slowness, as if Earth's gravity were a strange burden. Their faces were smooth, featureless, except for large, round, completely black eyes and round, lipless mouths that opened and closed slowly in time with the song coming from the sea. Were they the singers, or were they just answering the call? There were maybe a dozen of them, perhaps more, scattered on the wet rocks, all facing the sea, towards the pulsing lights. Some raised their long arms towards the moon. Others simply stood swaying gently, their round mouths opening and closing. The smell emanating from them was strong, brine, rotting seaweed, and something else, a metallic, sweet odor that turned my stomach. I stayed there, hidden between the rocks, barely, breathing, witnessing this. Congregation, ritual, whatever it was. The terror was so intense it paralyzed me completely. These creatures were not of this world, or at least not the part of the world we know. They were ancient, abyssal, awakened or drawn by the full moons. Light, emerging from the depths to perform their silent singing ritual. I watched for what felt like an eternity. Then, gradually, the singing began to fade. The pulsing lights in the sea sank and disappeared, and the figures on the rocks, one by one, slowly turned and slid back into the dark waves, vanishing beneath the silver surface without a trace. Within minutes, the shore was empty again, except for me, trembling uncontrollably in my hiding place. The metallic, briny smell still hung in the air. I scrambled back up to the cottage as fast as I could, stumbling on the rocks, heart threatening to explode. I locked the door, leaned against it, gasping for breath. I had witnessed something not meant for human eyes. The full moon passed. Life returned to normal, or almost. The writer's block vanished, replaced by a torrent of feverish words, trying to describe the indescribable, trying to process the horror I had witnessed. But peace was gone forever. I know what's out there now. I know what the full moon awakens. In the coastal depths. On subsequent full moons, I haven't dared go down to the rocks again. I watch from the relative safety of my porch. The singing still comes from the sea, the lights still pulse, and I know the pale figures are down there, on the wet rocks, performing their silent ritual beneath the silver tide. I don't know what they are or what they want, but I've realized something worse. The singing. I've started hearing it even when it's not a full moon, faint, distant on the edge of my hearing, especially when I look out at the sea for too long. And my dreams are filled with silver oceans, pulsing lights and pale figures with black eyes and round mouths calling me into the depths. I think witnessing it marked me. Or maybe the song, once heard so closely, never truly leaves. Maybe a part of me now belongs to the silver tide. The isolation I sought has become a prison, not of loneliness, but of the knowledge of what truly exists out there, waiting for the moon to wax full again. And the worst fear isn't what they might do to me if they found me. It's the growing feeling that maybe someday I might feel the urge to join them on the rocks, to answer the call. So what did you think of this chilling descent into these glimpses of the terror the full moon seems to awaken? Did these stories make you believe the full moon holds a real influence over us or the world around? Have you ever witnessed something inexplicable on a full moon night? If this narrative compilation left you feeling uneasy and perhaps looking at the night sky with a newfound respect or fear, please show your support by hitting the like button. It truly helps bring more tales from the lunar shadows to the channel. Share your own full moon story, a theory about these phenomena, or just your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice and stories matter here. And most importantly, if you crave more dark and unsettling narratives that explore the terror lurking beneath the pale moonlight, subscribe to the Hear This Fear channel and turn on notifications. Next time the moon is full, perhaps it's best to stay inside.